The man whose net worth could alter the skyline of downtown Boston never truly saw the woman refilling his water glass. To Sterling Blackwood, she was part of the restaurant's machinery, a silent cog in a black bistro apron, notable only for a faint, peculiar accent he found irritatingly common. In a moment of calculated theatre designed to impress his dinner guest, he decided to make her the evening's entertainment. He would demonstrate the casual cruelty that was a perquisite of his power. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed the woman with the weary eyes was of no consequence. He did not know he was speaking to Elara Valdez, and that with a few carefully chosen words, she was about to unearth a secret that would bring his entire empire to its knees. The air inside Aura, perched atop the Prudential Tower, was rarefied, tasting of aged leather, seared A5 Wagyu, and the quiet hum of immense capital. It was a Wednesday evening, but for the men and women who dined here, the calendar was a suggestion, not a mandate. Time was marked by quarterly earnings reports and the launch of new hedge funds. For Elara Valdez, time was marked by the relentless ticking of an 8-hour shift, the deep ache that settled into the arches of her feet, and the precise angle at which to pour a 2014 Screaming Eagle Cabernet without letting a single drop mar the pristine white tablecloth. She moved through the labyrinth of tables with an economy of motion that bordered on spectral. Her uniform was stark, a black button-down shirt, black slacks, a long black apron. Her dark, wavy hair was pulled back in a simple, low ponytail, a style that emphasized the exhaustion etched around her hazel eyes, but did nothing to dim their sharp, observational quality. Most of the clientele looked through her. She was a function, a pair of hands to deliver their lobster bisque and remove the evidence of their consumption. She had come to prefer it. Invisibility was a form of peace. Tonight, however, her peace was about to be shattered. Table 12, the prime corner booth with a god's eye view of the glittering city, was occupied by Sterling Blackwood. Blackwood wasn't merely rich, he was a predator, a private equity titan who had built a fearsome reputation buying beloved, often struggling, American companies, only to strip them of their assets, fire their employees, and sell the hollowed-out shell for a profit. He called it unlocking value. The people whose lives he'd ruined called it by other names. His suit was a bespoke Tom Ford that cost more than Elara's car, but he wore it like armor, a constant, aggressive statement of his own importance. Everything about him was a performance. The booming laugh that was slightly too loud for the hushed room, the platinum Patek Philippe that seemed to catch the light with deliberate malice, the way he'd waved away the sommelier with a flick of his wrist, as if the man's lifetime of study was an amusing trifle. Seated across from him was a man who seemed carved from a different, older stone. Arthur Vance was in his late 70s, his face a roadmap of sun and wisdom earned over a long life. His silver hair was neat, his tweed jacket well worn, but of impeccable quality. He was not a financier or a tech mogul. Arthur Vance was Napa Valley royalty. His family had been growing grapes in the Stag's Leap district since the late 19th century. His palate was legendary, his opinion capable of making or breaking a new winery with a single, thoughtful pronouncement. He was the gatekeeper, the conscience of American wine. And Sterling Blackwood desperately needed his blessing. Blackwood's latest venture was his most audacious, the acquisition of the legendary and recently struggling Solstice Vineyard. It was one of Napa's founding estates, and Blackwood wanted to turn it into a global luxury brand, complete with a hotel and a members-only club. But the Napa establishment was a closed circle. Without the implicit approval of a man like Arthur Vance, the project would be seen as a hostile takeover by an outside barbarian. This dinner was the entire campaign. Ilara had served men like Blackwood before. They were a particular species of predator, men who mistook their bank balance for a measure of their humanity. She approached the table, the heavy glass water pitcher cool against her palm. "Good evening, gentlemen. Water for the table to start? We have still or sparkling." Her voice was quiet, professional, but it carried the ghost of her past. It wasn't a foreign accent. Not exactly. It was a subtle, rural lilt, the kind one might find in an isolated agricultural valley, the vowels slightly flattened, the cadence musical but melancholic. It was the sound of a place, not a country. Blackwood didn't grace her with a glance. He was mid-monologue, boasting about a recent corporate raid. "So we leveraged their pension fund to finance the acquisition. Sheer genius. The board never saw it coming." He gestured impatiently at the pitcher. "Still. And tell your wine guy to bring us the 98 Cielo Verde. I trust he knows what that is." The sommelier, a kind man named Julian, whom Ilara respected, had already been dismissed. The request now fell to her. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she smoothed it into a mask of professional neutrality. "An excellent choice, sir. The Cielo Verde is a remarkable vintage." Arthur Vance, however, did look at her. His pale blue eyes, accustomed to studying the subtle variations in a grapevine's leaf, were curious. He had caught that flicker. "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. Ilara gave a slight nod and retreated, her posture erect, her steps measured. As she walked away, she felt Blackwood's eyes on her for the first time, not as a person, but as a minor, discordant note in his symphony of self-aggrandizement. Where was she from with that dirt farmer accent? It grated on him. When she returned with the water, Blackwood was pontificating on the decline of American standards. "The problem with this country, Arthur," he boomed, gesturing with a thick-fingered hand, "is a lack of pride. No one wants to work. They just want a handout. You pay a fortune for a meal like this, and you're served by someone who sounds like they just crawled out of a Steinbeck novel." He looked straight at Ilara as she poured Arthur Vance's water, his eyes cold and dismissive. The insult was a projectile, launched for effect, meant to signal to Vance that he, Sterling Blackwood, was a man of discerning taste, above the common rabble. Ilara's hand didn't tremble. The stream of water flowed silently into the crystal glass. Vance shifted in his seat, a frown creasing his weathered face. The comment was boorish, a display of cheap dominance that soured the atmosphere. "Sterling, that's unnecessary." But Blackwood was enjoying himself. He smirked at Ilara, a cruel twist of his lips. "Seriously, what is that accent? Ozarks? Appalachia? You should really try to polish that up if you want to work in a place like Aura. It's unrefined." The word hung in the air, ugly and heavy. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to recede. From her post near the entrance, the maître d', a formidable woman named Evelyn, stiffened. She knew Ilara was fiercely private, a hard worker who never caused a moment's trouble. She started to take a step toward the table, a protective instinct flaring. But Ilara, with a barely perceptible shake of her head, waved her off. She finished pouring the water and placed the pitcher on the service stand beside the table. She did not look flustered. She did not look wounded. She looked focused, as if she were tasting a complex wine, discerning its hidden notes. She turned her head, and her hazel eyes, clear and direct, met Sterling Blackwood's arrogant stare. And then she spoke. Her voice was different. The quiet, melancholic lilt was gone. It was replaced by a tone of quiet, unshakable authority. "The 98 Cielo Verde is a fascinating choice, sir," she began, her voice as calm as the still water in their glasses. Most people who order it do so for the name, for its rarity, but they don't truly understand the bottle. Blackwood's smirk faltered. This was not the reaction he'd expected. He'd anticipated tears, or stammering, or a hasty retreat. Ilara continued, her eyes now fixed on the unopened bottle that a busboy had just delivered to the service stand. That was the year of the late spring frost, you remember. It decimated nearly 40% of the crop on the eastern slope. The winemaker, old Miguel Valdez, was heartbroken. He thought the vintage was lost. Arthur Vance sat bolt upright. His blue eyes widened, a dawning recognition chasing away his initial annoyance. He knew that story. It was the stuff of Napa legend, a tale told over campfires by old vineyard hands, not something a waitress in Boston would ever know. But then came the summer. Ilara's voice grew softer, more intimate, as if she were sharing a sacred secret. The heat was intense but not scorching. The grapes that survived, they were smaller, more concentrated. Miguel said the vines put all their sorrow and all their strength into the few clusters that remained. He didn't use the standard American oak for aging that year. He used 2-year-old French barrels from Nevers, just a touch, to soften the tannins without overpowering the fruit. She took a step closer to the table, her gaze distant, as if she were seeing not a restaurant, but a sun-drenched hillside. When you drink it, you won't just taste blackberry and cassis. You'll taste the dust from the valley floor. You'll taste a hint of the wild sage that grows near the northern fence line. And if you're paying attention, her eyes flicked to Blackwood's, sharp as a shard of glass. You'll taste the struggle. You'll taste the resilience. You will taste the very soul of a place that was loved, a place that was fought for, and a place that was stolen. The silence that descended on the table was absolute. Sterling Blackwood stared at her, his face a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He was a man who dealt in numbers and leverage, not poetry and dust. He had no idea what she was talking about, but he understood, with a sickening certainty, that he had just been profoundly and publicly outmaneuvered. But the true impact was on Arthur Vance. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his voice a hoarse whisper. The northern fence line. Miguel always planted lavender there to keep the deer away. He said it made the sage smell sweeter. No one knows that. No one outside the family. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the deep, old sorrow in her eyes. Valdez, he breathed. You said Miguel Valdez. My God, you're one of his. Ilara offered a small, sad smile that did not reach her eyes. She picked up the wine key from the service stand, her movements fluid and practiced. He was my grandfather, she said, her voice reverting to its quiet, accented English. Cielo Verde was our home. And with that, she turned to the bottle of wine. A wine made from the soil of her stolen birthright. A wine that Sterling Blackwood had ordered to celebrate his power, utterly oblivious that he was drinking the last testament of the very family he had destroyed. He was about to be served his own crime, and the woman he'd just insulted was the only person left on earth who could tell him its true, bitter taste. The journey back to the kitchen's swinging doors was a traverse across a suddenly silent battlefield. Every nearby table had fallen quiet. The low murmur of conversation had ceased, replaced by the intense, focused attention of patrons who knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. They didn't understand the details, but they understood the dynamic. The lion had roared at the mouse, and the mouse had calmly explained the precise anatomy of the lion's own heart. When Ilara pushed into the bright, chaotic world of stainless steel and clattering pans, Julian the sommelier was waiting, his face a blend of astonishment and profound respect. "Elara," he whispered, "how in God's name did you know that? About the Nevers Oak? I've read every book on Cielo Verde, and that detail is nowhere." Elara placed the now unnecessary wine key on the counter, her hand finally allowing itself a slight tremor. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving a cold, hollow ache in its place. "My grandfather didn't write it in a book," she said, her voice tight. "He told me while we were cleaning the barrels." She busied herself, wiping down a non-existent spill, trying to reclaim the comforting anonymity of her routine. But it was gone. In one act of defiant dignity, she had lit a beacon, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that the ships were now turning in her direction. The look on Arthur Vance's face had not just been surprise, it was recognition. And recognition was a threat. Back at table 12, the climate was sub-zero. Sterling Blackwood's face was a mottled canvas of crimson and white. He was a man who lived in a world of controlled narratives and public triumphs. To be so thoroughly and elegantly dismantled, not by a corporate rival, but by a waitress, in front of Arthur Vance, was an agony beyond measure. "The nerve," he finally hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "The absolute, unmitigated nerve. She's fired. I'll buy this restaurant and have her fired. I'll sue her for slander." Arthur Vance wasn't listening. He was staring at the kitchen doors, his mind racing, connecting decades-old memories. Miguel Valdez, a stubborn, brilliant, fourth-generation winemaker, a man who considered his vineyard a sacred trust. Vance remembered the rumors, the shock that had rippled through Napa Valley 5 years ago. Cielo Verde, a paragon of family ownership, had been sold. Not sold, really. It was a hostile takeover, engineered by a ruthless East Coast equity firm that had bought up the vineyard's debt through a series of shell corporations. The family was forced out, bankrupted, scattered. The firm was Blackwood Capital. "Sterling," Vance said, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through Blackwood's tirade. "Shut up." Blackwood blinked, stunned into silence by the command. "Forget about firing her," Vance continued, his eyes like blue chips of ice. "I want to know who she is. I want to know her story." "She's a nobody," Blackwood sputtered, his ego raw. "She's a waitress with a grudge." "She's a Valdez," Vance corrected him, his voice low and resonant, with a gravity that Blackwood could not comprehend. "That wine you ordered, that trophy you wanted to flaunt, that's her family's legacy in a bottle. Nobodies do not possess that kind of knowledge. That knowledge is earned. It's in the blood." His mind was a whirlwind. Miguel's granddaughter. He remembered hearing about her. A brilliant girl, they said, had the best palate in the family. She'd disappeared after the foreclosure. Everyone assumed she'd gone to Mexico or just vanished into the anonymous workforce of the Central Valley. But she was here, in Boston, pouring water. "The Solstice deal," Blackwood said, desperately trying to regain control of the conversation. "Arthur, let's talk about the deal." "The deal," Vance said, his gaze turning to Blackwood with an expression of profound distaste, "is on hold. Indefinitely. My interest has shifted. That young woman is now more important to me than your 5-star resort and your branded Chardonnay. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Blackwood understood. He understood that his billion-dollar fantasy, the crowning achievement of his career, was now hostage to a woman in a black apron. The carefully constructed power dynamic of the evening had been shattered and reassembled with him at the very bottom. A cold, pragmatic fury replaced his hot-headed rage. He pulled out his phone, his thumb flying across the screen as he composed a text to his chief of security. a former Mossad agent who specialized in making problems disappear. Name, Ilara Valdez. Waitress at Aura, Prudential Tower. Dark hair, hazel eyes, strange accent. Find out everything. Where she lives, who she talks to, where she came from. I want her life on my desk by morning. I want leverage. This is your only priority. He put the phone down with a sharp click. It's being handled. When Ilara returned to the table to take their dinner order, a task she could not avoid without causing a scene, the tension was a palpable thing. She moved with professional grace, her notepad in hand, her face an unreadable mask. She did not make eye contact with Vance, but she could feel the weight of his stare, no longer just curious, but intense, searching, and filled with a sorrowful respect. As she stood beside him, he spoke, his voice low, for her ears alone. Your grandfather once showed me a photograph of you. You were a little girl, no more than 7, asleep in a grape gondola, your face stained with juice. Ilara froze for a heartbeat. A memory, sharp and vivid, pierced through the careful walls she had built around her heart. The smell of ripe grapes, the warmth of the afternoon sun, the rough, calloused hand of her grandfather stroking her hair. She straightened, her composure flawless, but a single tear welled and traced a silent path down her cheek before she quickly brushed it away. She replied in English, her voice barely audible. He was a good man, sir. She took their order, Blackwood sullenly demanding a steak, burnt to a crisp, a final petty act of desecration in this temple of gastronomy, and retreated. Her heart was a wild drum against her ribs. The past she had run from, the life she had mourned, had found her. All because a corporate monster had wanted to show off. Later that night, in her small, neat apartment in a quiet corner of Jamaica Plain, the city lights felt less like a promise and more like the bars of a cage. Her sanctuary was a single room filled with books on viticulture and soil science, a small pot of lavender on the windowsill, her only concession to beauty. Here she wasn't just a waitress. She was the last keeper of a lost legacy. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Evelyn, the maitre d'. A man was in the alley behind the restaurant after you left, watching, well-dressed. He left when he saw me. Be careful, Ilara. Ilara closed her eyes, a chill creeping over her that had nothing to do with the night air. The hunt had officially begun. Sterling Blackwood was looking for a weapon to destroy her. Arthur Vance was looking for a ghost to resurrect. And she, caught between them, knew that the quiet life she had so painstakingly built was over. They were about to discover the story of Ilara Valdez, the winemaker's granddaughter, and the secret she carried was not just the memory of a perfect wine, but the knowledge of the land itself, a knowledge that could either build a new future or burn Sterling Blackwood's empire to the ground. The next morning, a sleek encrypted tablet was placed on Sterling Blackwood's glass desk by his silent head of security. Blackwood had been awake all night, pacing his penthouse office, the stunning Boston Harbor view offering no solace to his raging mind. He snatched the device. "Report!" he commanded. "She's clean," the security chief said, his voice flat. "Too clean. It's unnatural." Blackwood scrolled through the file. It was infuriatingly thin. Name, Ilara Valdez. Current address, a rental in Jamaica Plain. Lease paid 6 months in advance, in cash. Employment, Aura. Hired 18 months ago. Previous employment, a series of waitressing jobs in Sacramento, Bakersfield, Fresno, a slow eastward migration from California. Before that, nothing. No credit history before the age of 22. No social media. No digital footprint. The private investigator we used said it's like she fell off the face of the earth 5 years ago. Fall off the earth? Blackwood snarled. Nobody just falls off the earth. Dig into the family, the vineyard, Cielo Verde. That's where it gets interesting, the chief continued. Cielo Verde was a private family trust. After your acquisition, the trust was dissolved. The assets were seized to cover the debts you held. The family members, uncles, cousins, scattered. Miguel Valdez died 6 months after the foreclosure. His wife, a year later. The granddaughter Ilara is listed on one document as the sole heir to the intellectual property. The name, the branding, but it was all worthless. Then she vanishes. He paused. There's one other thing. The land itself. The Cielo Verde property. Your agricultural division has been trying to cultivate it for 5 years with no success. Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. Bureaucratic incompetence. They can't grow grapes? They can grow grapes, the man clarified. They can't grow Cielo Verde grapes. The yields are low, the quality is mediocre, the soil chemistry is unique. The agronomists say it's one of the most complex microclimates they've ever seen. They say the old vines are dying, and the new ones won't take root properly. They've lost millions trying to replicate the original product. The internal reports suggest giving up and selling the land for residential development. Blackwood's mind churned. The worthless land. The ghost of a waitress. The taste of public humiliation. It didn't add up. His phone buzzed, displaying Arthur Vance's name. He answered, forcing a cordial tone into his voice. Arthur, I was just about to call. About last night? Last night was illuminating. Vance cut him off, his voice crisp. I am no longer in Boston. I've taken a flight to Sacramento. I'm driving up to Napa. I've been making some calls to old friends. The name Valdez still carries a great deal of weight in this valley, Sterling. More than Blackwood, I assure you. What are you doing, Arthur? Blackwood asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Due diligence, Vance replied. You want my support for the Solstice project? Then we need to have a conversation about the Cielo Verde project. I want to meet with the girl, with Miss Valdez, and not with you present. You are a compromised party. Arrange it. Have her meet me at the Boston Public Library, the courtyard, tomorrow at noon. Tell her I want to talk about her grandfather. The line went dead. Blackwood stared at the phone, feeling a vain throb in his temple. He was being dictated to, maneuvered, controlled, all by an old man and a waitress. He was Sterling Blackwood. He was the one who gave the orders. He would arrange the meeting, but he wouldn't be absent. He would have eyes and ears on them. He needed to know what their game was. Ilara spent the day in a state of hyper-aware anxiety. Evelyn's text had confirmed the danger. She went to work, performed her duties with robotic precision, but her senses were on fire. Every new patron could be one of his men. Every lingering glance felt like a threat. The message from Blackwood's office came via Evelyn. A meeting with Mr. Vance, the public library. Her heart leaped at the location. It was one of her few sanctuaries in the city, a place of quiet and knowledge. But the request itself was a dilemma. To meet was to engage. To refuse was to show fear. She remembered her grandfather's words. Never let a bully see you run, Mija. Stand your ground, even if the ground is shaking. She agreed. The next day, Ilara sat on the edge of the fountain in the library's magnificent courtyard. The gentle splash of water and the hushed reverence of the space calmed her frayed nerves. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, no uniform to hide behind. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely defiant. Arthur Vance arrived precisely at noon. He looked more at home here, among the stone arches, than he had in the glittering restaurant. He sat beside her, not too close, giving her space. "Thank you for coming, Miss Valdez," he said. "Elara is fine," she replied, her voice soft. "Elara, then." He was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "Your grandfather was my friend. Not a close friend. We were competitors in a way, but there was a deep, mutual respect. He made wine the way a poet writes a sonnet. What Sterling Blackwood did to him, to your family, it was a desecration." Elara simply nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in her throat. "What you did last night," Vance continued, his gaze direct, "was more than just defending yourself. That was a testament. You spoke for the land. You spoke for him. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. How do you know so much?" "I grew up in that soil," she said, looking at her own hands, which, despite lotions and care, still held the memory of hard work. "My grandfather didn't believe in delegating the important things. We walked the vineyard every morning. He taught me to read the vines, to taste the soil after a rain, to smell the air and know when to harvest. He kept detailed journals, not about finances, but about the life of the vineyard, the weather, the soil, the health of each block of vines. He called it the Libro del Alma, the book of the soul. I memorized it." Vance shook his head in wonder. "The agronomists at Blackwood Capital can't figure it out. They think the land is cursed." A sad, bitter smile touched Elara's lips. "The land isn't cursed. It's just heartbroken. Cielo Verde isn't a formula. It's a relationship. My family had a partnership with that soil for 100 years. We knew what it needed, what it feared. We knew which blocks needed shade in the afternoon and which needed the cool air from the creek at night. Blackwood's people came in with spreadsheets and technology. They tried to command it. You can't command that land. You have to listen to it." This was it. The secret. Not just a memory, but a living, breathing knowledge. A knowledge that was priceless and utterly non-transferable. "Blackwood is trying to buy the Solstice Vineyard," Vance said, getting to the heart of the matter. "He wants to be a Napa kingpin. I am, for better or worse, the man who can grant him that legitimacy or deny it." "Why are you telling me this?" Elara asked, her eyes searching his. "Because," Vance said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I have no intention of helping that man acquire another piece of Napa's soul. But I am a businessman. I don't want to just block him. I want to beat him. And I believe you, Elara Valdez, are the key. That land, your family's land, is his Achilles' heel. He thinks it's a worthless asset on his books. You and I know it's a sleeping giant." A plan began to form in Vance's mind, audacious and complex. A plan that wasn't just about justice, but about restoration. "He humiliated you," Vance stated. "He destroyed your family. I am offering you a chance to reclaim what is yours. But it will be a fight. He will come after you with everything he has." From a discreet distance, sitting at an outdoor cafe across the street, one of Blackwood's men spoke quietly into his lapel. "They're talking strategy. The old man is animated. She's listening. It looks like an alliance." In his office, Sterling Blackwood listened to the live feed, his knuckles white as he gripped his desk. An alliance. He had tried to crush a fly, and in doing so, he had accidentally created a monster. He had assumed she was insignificant, a piece of his forgotten past. He now realized she was the one person in the world who could expose his greatest business failure, the dead land of Cielo Verde. And she was now allied with the one man who could turn that failure into a weapon against him. The game had changed. This was no longer about a bruised ego. This was about survival. The revelation in the library courtyard solidified into a quiet, dangerous pact. It was not a bond forged in boardrooms, but in shared respect for a lost legacy. For Ilara, Arthur Vance was more than an ally. He was a living link to the world she had lost, a man who spoke her grandfather's language of soil and sun. For Vance, Ilara was the embodiment of everything he felt was vanishing from Napa Valley: authenticity, heritage, and a knowledge that couldn't be bought or synthesized. "What do you have in mind?" Ilara asked, her voice steady, the initial fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Blackwood understands only one thing: leverage," Vance explained, his eyes fixed on the distant Boston skyline. "Right now he thinks you're a liability, a public relations nuisance he needs to silence. We must convince him that you are, in fact, his only asset." "How?" "He can't make the Cielo Verde land productive," Vance stated. "My sources confirm his agricultural division is about to write it off as a total loss. They've poured millions into it, and all they've produced is third-rate table wine. The brand name Cielo Verde is worthless without the original product to back it up. It's a massive, embarrassing failure hidden deep in his portfolio. We're going to bring it into the light." The plan was audacious. Vance would use his immense influence in the wine world to begin circulating rumors. Not about Ilara or the confrontation at Aura, but about the Cielo Verde problem. He would have respected critics and vintners casually mention the legendary vineyard that had gone silent, the mysterious failure of a corporate giant to tame a piece of hallowed ground. He would plant a seed of doubt about Blackwood's Midas touch. "He'll try to crush you first," Vance warned, his expression grim. "He'll dig for dirt, try to intimidate you, buy you off. You must be prepared." "There is no dirt he can find that is worse than what he's already done to me," Ilara said simply, "and he doesn't have enough money to buy back my grandfather's life." The next few weeks were a quiet war. True to Vance's prediction, the pressure on Ilara was immense. A sleek black car was perpetually parked down the street from her apartment. Her phone buzzed with calls from unknown numbers. A man in a suit approached her after her shift, offering a check with an astonishing number of zeros. A severance package, he called it, in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement and her immediate departure from Boston. She refused without a word. The psychological toll was heavy. She felt hunted, her small world shrinking. But every morning, she would tend to the lavender on her windowsill, close her eyes, and remember the feeling of the dry, warm earth of Cielo Verde beneath her feet. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for that patch of ground 3,000 miles away. Meanwhile, Vance's campaign was a masterclass in subtlety. An influential wine blogger penned a nostalgic piece about the lost vintages of Cielo Verde. At a prestigious Napa auction, a single bottle of the '98 vintage, the same one from the restaurant, sold for a record-breaking price, sparking a flurry of articles asking, "What happened to America's greatest ghost winery?" Sterling Blackwood felt the pressure mounting. His bid for the Solstice Vineyard had stalled. Board members were asking quiet questions. The narrative he so carefully controlled was slipping from his grasp. His multi-million-dollar failure was becoming a public topic of conversation. The land he had acquired as a simple asset was becoming a symbol of his hubris. He knew he had to confront the source of the problem. He couldn't intimidate her. He couldn't buy her. He had to negotiate, but he would do it on his terms. He summoned Ilara to his office, not as a request, but as a demand delivered by a courier, implying legal consequences for non-compliance. The meeting was set for the top floor of his corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass designed to intimidate. Elara arrived, not in her waitress uniform, but in the same simple, dignified attire she had worn to the library. She walked through the cavernous marble lobby, past the abstract art that cost more than a house, and rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the penthouse floor. She felt the weight of the building, the sheer power of the capital it represented, pressing down on her. But as the doors opened, she took a deep breath and remembered her grandfather standing in his vineyard, a king in a kingdom of dirt and vines. Blackwood was standing by the panoramic window, his back to her, a silhouette against the city. "Miss Valdez," he said, without turning, "you have caused me a great deal of trouble." "You mistake trouble for truth, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice calm and clear. Refusing, he turned, a predator cornered in his own glass and steel habitat, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This vendetta of yours, this performance Vance is orchestrating on your behalf. Name your price. Every nuisance has a price. What will it take to make you and your ghost story vanish?" "I have already informed you," she replied, her voice a quiet counterpoint to the city's muted roar beyond the window. "My history is not for sale." "Everything is for sale," he bellowed, the sound shockingly raw in the acoustically perfect office. His composure, the billion-dollar suit of armor he wore every day, finally fractured. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, his physical presence a tactic he'd used 1,000 times to intimidate lesser men. "You are a server in a bistro, living in a rented room. I am offering you a kingdom, a life of absolute, thoughtless comfort. And you are discarding it for what? For sentimental delusions about soil and dead relatives?" The words, so similar to the insult that had ignited this firestorm, were now just ash in the wind. They held no heat, no power to wound. She had been through the fire and had come out forged. She met his enraged glare, not with fear, but with a profound, almost pitying calm. "That sentimental delusion is the foundation of the prison you now find yourself in," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial level that forced him to lean in, to listen. "You acquired a vineyard, Mr. Blackwood, but you never understood what you had purchased. You thought you were buying real estate, an asset, a line item on a balance sheet. But you were buying a living thing, a relationship a century old. You don't own Cielo Verde. You are merely its jailer, and it is dying in your custody." A vein throbbed in his temple. "I will bulldoze it to bedrock," he threatened, his voice a low, guttural snarl, his face inches from hers. "I will salt the earth and build 1,000 identical McMansions on its corpse. I will erase every last trace of your family's name from this earth." "Please do," Elara whispered, and the 2 words carried the devastating force of a tectonic shift. They were not a bluff. They were an invitation. "Do it." And Arthur Vance will hold a press conference the next day. He will ensure that every major newspaper, every influential blog, every sommelier and collector from London to Tokyo knows the story of Sterling Blackwood, the great corporate visionary who spent hundreds of millions to acquire a priceless piece of American heritage and was so incompetent, so utterly bereft of vision, that his only recourse was to pave it over. You won't be seen as ruthless. You'll be seen as a fool, a punchline in the very world you are so desperate to conquer. The Solstice deal will not just evaporate. It will become a case study in your failure. Your legacy will be a parking lot. She had him. It was not just the logic of her words, but the unassailable truth behind them. He stared at her, and for the first time, he saw her. He saw past the waitress, past the nuisance, and saw a strategist of terrifying clarity, a woman who had diagnosed his single greatest vulnerability, his monumental, insatiable ego. He staggered back as if struck. The rage, a hot and blinding force, drained out of him, leaving behind the cold grey ash of a devastating reality. He collapsed into one of his Eames chairs, the supple leather sighing under his weight. The armor was gone, and the man inside was small, exposed, and utterly defeated. "What?" he asked, the word a hoarse, broken thing, stripped of all its former power. "What do you want?" It was not a demand. It was a surrender. This was the moment, the precipice she and Vance had planned for. She did not answer with a demand for money, or an apology, or even the return of her land. She answered with the only thing that mattered, a proposition that was also a judgment. "I want to go home," she said, her voice resonant with a power that filled the vast office. "And I am going to bring Cielo Verde back to life. For you." Blackwood's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed with confusion and suspicion. "For me?" "You will retain legal ownership of the land for now," she began, laying out the terms they had rehearsed, her voice as crisp and precise as a legal brief. "A shell corporation, to which you will be the sole shareholder. You will provide all necessary capital for the complete restoration of the vineyard and the winery. You will fund it completely, without question or delay. It will be done under my sole and absolute direction." She paused, letting the weight of the next word settle. "We will form a new operating company, Cielo Verde Resurrected. You will provide the capital. I will provide the knowledge, the Libro del Alma. I will be the president, the chief winemaker, the final authority on every decision, from the choice of rootstock to the color of the labels. And I will hold a 51% controlling, non-dilutable stake in this new company." It was an audacious, almost insane proposal. She was demanding he pay her to take control of his own asset. A flicker of his old arrogance sparked. And why, in God's name, would I ever agree to that? "First," she said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "because it is the only path you have to recoup a $1 from the black hole that Cielo Verde has become on your books. Second, because with me in charge, that vineyard will once again produce a wine that will command thousands of dollars a bottle. Your initial investment will seem like a pittance. Your greatest public failure will be spun into your most visionary triumph. You will not be the destroyer, but the wise patron who recognized genius and had the humility to step aside." She held his gaze, delivering the final, perfect blow. "And third, because Arthur Vance and his entire Napa consortium will publicly and enthusiastically endorse this new partnership. They will guarantee the success of the project, which will, in turn, unfreeze your solstice ambitions. It is your golden bridge, Mr. Blackwood, your only way out of the abyss you dug for yourself." She offered him not just a deal, but a narrative, a way to rewrite his own humiliation into a story of success. He looked at her, at the quiet, unshakable certainty in her hazel eyes, and he knew. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly checkmated. The man whose net worth could alter skylines had been cornered by the one person who knew the true value of a single patch of dirt. He had tried to make her an evening's entertainment, and now she was making him her junior partner. The irony was as bitter and complex as the wine that had started it all. The agreement was not sealed with a handshake. It was forged in the crucible of a month-long legal war. Armies of lawyers descended, Blackwood's team attempting to insert clauses, create loopholes, and claw back some semblance of control. They fought over percentages, over budgets, over termination clauses. But Alara, with Arthur Vance as her unwavering legal and moral guarantor, was an immovable object. Her 51% was non-negotiable. Her absolute operational autonomy was the bedrock of the entire deal. Blackwood, a man who lived to dictate terms, found himself signing a document that effectively made him a silent investor in his own property. He was paying for the privilege of watching the woman he had scorned resurrect the legacy he had shattered. The first time Ilara set foot on the land of Cielo Verde again, it was not a homecoming. It was an arrival at a desecrated grave. She did not weep. The grief was too deep, too cold for tears. The vineyard she remembered as a vibrant tapestry of green and gold was a monochrome of brown and grey. The great Zinfandel vines her great-grandfather had planted, vines that had survived Prohibition and the Great Depression, were skeletal, choked with invasive weeds. The air, which should have smelled of rich earth and wild sage, carried the sterile, chemical tang of industrial herbicides. The soil under her boots was not the soft, fragrant loam she knew. It was compacted, lifeless, and dry as dust. He had not just wounded it. He had tried to murder its soul. She spent the first month not in the dilapidated farmhouse, but in a tent pitched on the highest knoll, the very spot where her grandfather had taught her the names of the constellations. She did nothing but walk. From sunrise to sunset, she walked the dead rose, her hands trailing over the withered canes, her senses straining to hear a heartbeat that was no longer there. She carried his journal, the Libro del Alma, its pages filled with his elegant script detailing a century of conversation with this land. It was her scripture, her map back from the wilderness. Her first directive was not to plant, but to heal. She fired the entire agricultural crew Blackwood had employed. She brought in tons of organic compost, truckloads of mulch. She planted a complex cover crop of mustard, vetch, and clover, not for harvest, but to be tilled back into the earth, to feed the starving soil, to invite the worms and the bees back home. Blackwood's accountants in Boston nearly had aneurysms. The quarterly reports she submitted were alien documents, filled with terms like mycorrhizal fungi networks and soil biodiversity, with not a single mention of revenue projections or ROI. Blackwood, furious and impotent, tried to interfere. He sent a team of his top agronomists to consult. Ilara met them at the gate, handed them a copy of the autonomy clause in her contract, and politely told them to leave. Each attempt to exert control was a small, draining battle, but she held her ground. A solitary queen defending a ruined kingdom. Vance visited her once during that first brutal year. He found her not in the farmhouse, but in the fields, her face smeared with dirt, her hair escaping its ponytail, her hands stained and calloused. She was overseeing the most painful task of all, the pruning. She was cutting the ancient, dying vines back to a single gnarled stump, a brutal, seemingly destructive act that required an almost insane degree of faith. "This is more than hard work," Vance observed, his voice soft with understanding as he stood beside her on the eastern slope. "It's an exorcism," she confessed, her voice rough with exhaustion and dust. "I have to purge his chemicals, his ignorance, his contempt from the soil itself. Some days I think it's too late, that he really did kill it." "He only scarred it," Vance said, his gaze fixed on the rows of what looked like amputated limbs. "The roots go deeper than he could ever imagine, Ilara. Like yours." And slowly, painstakingly, the land began to answer. The cover crops flourished, a riot of defiant green and yellow. The soil, fed and nurtured, grew dark, rich, and fragrant once more. The following spring, a miracle occurred. From the gnarled, seemingly dead stumps of the old Zinfandel vines, tentative new shoots of the most vibrant green began to emerge. It was a resurrection, a promise whispered from the earth directly to her. It took 3 full years before the harvest was worthy of the Cielo Verde name. 3 years of relentless toil, of battling early frosts and summer heat waves, of doubt that gnawed at her in the lonely nights. The first harvest was small, precious. Ilara and a tiny, hand-picked crew harvested the grapes themselves in the pre-dawn chill, their breath misting in the air. She supervised every step of the winemaking process, not with technology, but with instinct, with taste, with the knowledge passed down in her blood. The wine was not the same as her grandfather's. It couldn't be. The world had changed. She had changed, but it carried the same indelible soul. When the first bottle was finally ready, she opened it alone in the now restored farmhouse kitchen. She poured a glass, held it to the light, and saw the deep, familiar ruby. She swirled it, and the aroma that rose was not just of blackberry and cassis, but of wild sage, of valley dust, and of a faint, resilient lavender. She took a sip, and she tasted home. She tasted the struggle. She tasted the resilience. She tasted vengeance and forgiveness, all in one complex, beautiful sip, and in that moment she wept. Not from sorrow, but from a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. The release of the Cielo Verde Resurrected was an international event, orchestrated by Vance with the flair of a master showman. It sold out in hours. The critical acclaim was universal and ecstatic. It was hailed not just as a magnificent wine, but as the greatest comeback story in the history of American agriculture. Sterling Blackwood, as she had predicted, became even wealthier. The asset he had written off as a catastrophic loss was now the most valuable jewel in his portfolio. He was lauded in the Wall Street Journal as a visionary who had rescued a piece of Americana. He accepted the accolades at press conferences, his face a tight, unreadable mask, the words of praise tasting like acid in his mouth. He visited the vineyard only once, years later, unannounced. He came not in a helicopter, but in a simple sedan he drove himself. He found Ilara walking the rows at dusk, her dog at her side. The vineyard was thriving, a perfect portrait of health and vitality under the setting sun. She was no longer the haunted waitress or the fierce warrior. She was a woman at peace in her own domain. He didn't get out of the car. He simply watched her for a long time, this woman who moved with the land as if she were a part of it. He had tried to own this place. He had tried to command it. He saw now that it couldn't be owned, only served. He had learned a brutal lesson about a type of power that could not be leveraged, liquidated, or acquired in a hostile takeover. Without a word, he put the car in reverse and drove away. Not a better man, perhaps, but a profoundly altered one. Ilara felt his presence, but did not turn. His chapter was closed. Her victory was not in his departure, but in the rustle of healthy leaves in the evening breeze, in the deep purple stain of grapes on her hands, in the quiet, sacred dignity of her work. She had not needed a fortune or a rescue. Her inheritance had been something far more potent, a knowledge born of love, a resilience forged in loss, and an unbreakable bond with the soul of a place. She had been a waitress, a ghost, an heir. Now she was simply the winemaker, home at last, her hands in the living earth, under the wide and endless sky.